And there we go. Well, welcome everybody to tonight's live stream, Truth Proof live stream Thursday nights. And I've got to say, I'm really amazed at how many people are in the chat tonight, and it's absolutely fantastic that you can all join us tonight. And I'll just go through a few name checks when I get this little tab closed. Let's see who's in the chat tonight. Well, UFO podcast, and John Thomas, Lisa Ordy's in the chat tonight, and Paul Sinclair, surprise, is in the chat tonight. Stargazer Eternal, welcome to the show. Alison Buttle, welcome Alison. And Twitchy Curtains, see if I get some through some more. Marley Dodgson, Mikey, Paranormal Investigator, I think I mentioned. Rebecca King, Simon Riley, and Patricia Adams-Wright. Welcome, and thanks for all your support on the live stream tonight, guys. I've just got to mention that, yes, you probably noticed I've got a bit of something going on here. I'm applying for a department job, a shop department job next month. You probably know which job I'm going to go for with this beard. So, yeah, that's all well and good. So, we've got a great guest on tonight, for my chit-chat. And we're just going to play our little intro card, and we'll see you at the other side. Well, enough of that. It looks like it didn't want to play for us tonight properly, but there you go. You got the gist of it. Without further ado, then, I'm going to welcome Paul and his guest on tonight's show. Welcome.
Thank you, Les. On this wet, terrible November evening, I think we're all sat with central heating on if we can afford it. But yeah, as Les says, we've got a great guest tonight. Really knowledgeable. I've listened to a few of this guy's podcasts, and we're going to be talking to Andy McGrillen. That UFO podcast, sort of mundane sounding name, but gets some of the best UFO and ufologists, cryptid researchers in the world. Andy, welcome to Truth Proof.
Hi, Paul. How you doing?
All good tonight, mate, and really happy to be speaking to you, and you can share a few of your views with myself and these listeners. So
yeah, it's good to be on. Thanks.
You just give us a bit of background on the podcast first, please, will you?
Yeah, sure. Like you say, mundane name. I remember it was during COVID, the first kind of couple of weeks. We heard we were going to go into some form of a lockdown, and not knowing what that was going to entail, and it was going to be a few weeks and we'd all be back out of it. I bought a podcast microphone, having never done one before, no idea how it would even run, how to put one out there to the world to listen to. The world, I thought maybe one person, two people would listen. And it sat in a box for a few weeks, and then as the kind of lockdown went on and it was weeks turned into a month and so on, I reached out to a few people saying, look, do you want to come and chat about UFOs? I didn't even have a name for it at that point, and the name came from, what would people Google if they were going to look for a podcast? And well, they'd put in UFO and they would put in podcast, and I was like, the UFO podcast? That's even more mundane than that. So that UFO podcast is what I landed on. That is the name. And yeah, it kind of grew arms and legs pretty quick. Really, I don't know why, really strangely. It just kind of caught on, and word of mouth spread, and guests were really kind, helping me get other guests on, and it kind of grew quickly. Social media played a big part in that as well. People were really kind, sharing it, talking about it, liking it if they did like it, and really got the engagement up as well. And then after a while, speaking to some people online, the Signal, people might know him from Twitter, Dan Zetterstrom. I'd had a few back and forwards with Dan. I never knew him before then. And I asked him, look, I'm looking to do like a watch-along show on Skinwalker Ranch. I need someone to come on and talk to about it. Otherwise, it's just me commentating for 50 minutes on a TV show. And he came on, not wanting to do it. I'm sure he won't mind me saying he was quite nervous. Had never done that before. and we kind of got to know each other over the course of a couple of years as well. And Dan's like a regular on the podcast now too, providing analysis. And I'm not ashamed to say Dan's analysis is probably second to none in the UFO community when it comes to knowing what he's talking about, up-to-date stuff, historical stuff, the legislation going through US Congress. So yeah, he's been a big part of it as well as many others have, which is great. And yeah, for some reason, all of that brings me to here with yourself, having bumped into you a few times at conferences.
That's correct, yeah. And I've asked you a few times if you'll come on, and likewise, you've asked me to go on your podcast, which I will do. I think we've arranged a date, but it's success. I mean, you've got a good formula there because, like you said, you started in lockdown, and you've got, did you say 18,000 subscribers?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that's relative. My 6-year-old doesn't find that impressive because he watches a channel that's got 2 million. So yeah, 18,000.
It's still good to say that you do this as a sideline. You've got your main passion of all the other podcasts, and yeah, really good. So you're interested in UFOs and unexplained phenomena as a whole. Where did it start?
Very young. I've always credited my gran. She passed away a few years ago, but from being very young, she would tell us all kinds of stories about, how the pyramids might have been built in, Egypt, and Loch Ness was a big one of mine that I loved growing up. Used to have loads of VHS. I was that geeky kid that would go to the local library. I'm 36, so we're talking the early 90s here. So libraries were still a thing. I would go and rent videos on all kinds of kind of conspiracy stuff, UFOs. Loch Ness was my big kind of passion as a young child. Always had a keen interest, and these were the days before the internet as well. And then mid-90s, to talk about what my own kind of first and biggest experience, I was at the Boys Brigade. If you're in the UK, you'll be aware of the BB Boys Brigade. It's a bit like the Scouts in the US, I suppose. And leaving there, kind of cold night like this, do you know what? Almost, it would have been about this time of year in the mid-90s. We were leaving the church, so cold, dark night. 5 of us, myself, my mum, my sister, my friend and his mum, and we lived quite local to the church. It was a very built-up area, no big sprawling fields or anything. It was houses and flats and shops as far as the eye can see. And along the end of this road, again, loads of traffic and stuff. 9 o'clock at night, it must have been. There was it looked like a Ferris wheel. I think that's what you would call it in the States and stuff as well, or like a carnival Ferris wheel, but tilted at an angle. So like this.
Like 45s.
Yeah. Maybe not even as extreme as that, but yeah, it was definitely tilted, and it was spinning ridiculously quick. So I could just make out these lights going round and round and round and round. And we kind of stopped for a second and looked along at it, and I just remembered we're going back like 25 years here at this point. The general conversation was, what's that? Oh, that looks pretty strange, doesn't it? There's no carnival. It would have been next to a sports complex in a hill. It wasn't in the sky. It was on the ground. You couldn't see the bottom of it for the trees and the houses at the end of the road. And yeah, it was going at a speed that if people were on board as such, it was a Ferris wheel, then they would have been thrown off it at incredible speeds. It would have killed them. But it wasn't a Ferris wheel, like I say, and we didn't stay. And this is something I'm sure you've spoken to loads of experiencers or people who have had sightings. I never claim to be an experiencer. That's something different. But people who have had sightings, how it ends is so strange that there was no camera phones. It would have been big JVC handheld camcorders, if anything, at the time, and no one carried those about. We just looked at it and then left and walked home.
Did you discuss it on the way home, or just not really afterwards at much at all?
Not that I remember. I remember like thinking about it the whole way home. The walk would have taken less than 10 minutes, and it would have been out of view pretty quickly as we walked. But I lived in a high-rise flat that had like 19 floors, and we lived like 8 floors up at the time, and it was on a hill. And if I always remember thinking going home, if I'd went up the flat, and anyone familiar with the UK and the kind of high-rise flats, there's like staircase that goes right up the back of them. So this would have been hundreds of feet in the air, and I was going to go and look out to see, because it would have looked down on this area, and I was just too scared because I don't know what I would have seen. I'm guessing nothing at that point, but it was in a busy area. There was loads of cars, loads of houses. There was never anything in the news about it, and people might ask, well, something that big in that kind of a built-up area, why did no one talk about it? Well, 5 of us saw it, and we didn't talk about it to anyone, because what do you do? Who do you report it to?
That's the case, though, isn't it? I get reports, and I'm sure many other people listening to this will. equally know of people who've seen things in built-up areas of residential places that they shouldn't have actually been there. I spoke about one last week, not in a built-up area, but actually on the cliffs at Bempton, about a guy who saw a huge, looked like a barrage balloon above the old RAF base, and he's physically pointing to people on the cliff tops and trying to direct them to it.
Yeah.
And he said nobody were interested, nobody were looking. I mean, I'm not saying that nobody were interested in what you've said, just sort of sitting on fence a bit here. I mean, there's no way that could have been some kind of laser lights or anything.
Mid-90s, it was definitely something solid behind it. Like,
yeah,
it was lights firing round, and to hold the lights in that pattern, they weren't flashing up onto the clouds.
You
know,
saw
it wasn't
it,
like,
I didn't.
yeah,
No,
I would be the same. And even now, if I see something that's always, well, it would be this, it could be this, it could be this, and it was just like I say, imagine a Ferris wheel at that angle spinning like a washing machine would be going. So it was going
clockwise
too fast.
or anti-clock, just out of interest.
Now I would be guessing.
Right.
I think it was because I'm looking at it straight on, so it would have been going back the way, so probably clockwise as I looked at it.
I just asked because I've had reports, you probably have yourself, people talking about seeing objects spinning, and most of the time they've said in a clockwise motion, you know.
I think, like, again, like I say, with that, I would just be guessing anyway. But 30 years later, almost after the event, it makes me wonder, in that kind of built-up area, and speaking to the people I've spoken to, similar to yourself, and people that will be in the chat or listening or watching this afterwards, is it a case of that only certain people not get to see these things? But because my mum's not a believer in the subject, she doesn't like or entertain the subject of UFOs and aliens. Like, I ask her about it now, she kind of dismisses it as, yeah, I remember seeing it, don't know what it was, but it wasn't aliens, wasn't you? You know, well, I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was pretty strange. And you wonder, did people far closer, because it would have literally ran next to a road, not see it? Was anything there? And it just happened to be at the distance we were at the time it was. We saw it because of where we were. And I don't know, because it was in such a built-up area, that other people would have seen it.
So we aren't going into any personal details. How do you attribute your mum's non-interest when you've got such an avid interest? Is it just, you know, when she hears you and you're maybe relating some of the things that you've been told, some of the guests you've had on? I don't even know if you do that, but is it still I'm not really that interested, Andy. Stop.
No, not at all. Don't worry. Nah, like, I don't even think I talked to my mum much about the podcast. I think that the extent of it, she'll ask, "Are you still doing the podcast thing?" And I'll be like, "Mm-hmm. Is it going good?" Yep. And that's pretty much it. She's never had an interest in that aspect. For her, I think she's got a very standard, generic, you don't have things like that coming here because it's too far away and we're not all seeing them all the time. So,
well,
they don't exist.
So your mum's of the mind of what a lot of people are, and we're sort of traversing the galaxies and coming, you know, all these millions upon millions of light years away. Where do you think these things are coming from?
Oh, I mean, that's a question all over.
I know.
Yeah. I don't think anymore. When I first got into the subject and over the years, kind of looking at it, you have that idea of things coming from other planets, and then how far away could it be? Other galaxies, other universes, and then you get into different dimensions, different realities. And I think the more you speak to people, and I've kept an open mind as much as I can, I think it's a little bit of everything when you look at it. And I think that's the only way you can explain so much happening. And it almost seems now like something coming from another planet is almost the more mundane of all the possibilities. As fascinating as it still is, there's just so much now on the plate.
What a good sort of staple explanation for the things not to be here, though. 20, 30 years ago. But before we leave your sighting, you touched on Loch Ness. Have you got any stories regarding Loch Ness?
I went to visit as a kid for a birthday. My dad and my stepmom took me to Inverness for the weekend to see Loch Ness properly. Stunning area, absolutely beautiful. I would recommend anyone goes and visits, but don't expect to see something. I think it's one of those that, unless you're there for maybe a length of time, and even then it's very hit and miss. So I never saw anything myself, but I used to watch loads of VHS tapes, had loads of books, scrapbooks, anything I could get my hands on in the local library. So yeah, it's one that's kind of been close to my heart all these years, and I'd always recommend people kind of have a look into it themselves.
Do you think it's more myth than reality?
I think it's a head versus heart argument these days because so little still really gets not that it's not spotted, but it's not really reported on as often as it would have been in the 90s. It's kind of one of those things that is what it is. And then Ted Danson done his famous movie, didn't he? That people may or may not have heard of. So I think people have seen something. Whether there's an ancient dinosaur in the loch, I don't know. But there's, again, it's similar to the UFO subject or the paranormal or ghosts or cryptids. I think there's too many people reporting so much that there can't be something there.
Yeah.
What that is, though, I don't know.
I know of a salmon fisherman who lives on the loch with a property that looks down onto the loch on the edge, paving his drive, didn't believe in any of it, and then looked over and saw a long, thin head out of the water. Obviously changed his perception and everything. I got the information last year, and there's quite a bit to talk about. We had a guy on who's, I can't remember his name, Lesmite, but who's written books and is avidly into the subject of the Loch Ness, and he lives close, so I mean he's better positioned than me. But if this story, what I were told, is correct, he'd gone for many years. He'd probably gone for 25, 30 years just thinking it were all a load of rubbish, and then actually he'd seen it. So I don't know. I don't suppose we intended talking about the Loch Ness Monster tonight, but yeah, I mean, we can move on. You've had a second sighting, haven't you? In 2019, was it?
Yeah, 2019 December. Driving home from work before I started the podcast, probably 6 months before it, and it was probably the catalyst for starting the podcast before COVID was really a thing. Driving home and took a kind of back country road, but a very busy one. That's the type of road you take to avoid the motorway, where it's an extra 15 minutes drive, but the traffic keeps going and it's a bit longer, but you get home. So I took the back road, and I'll say for a start, I've always been honest, it is next to an airport. So there are things in the sky there all the time. Very low aircraft as well, given you're literally 2 seconds away from the landing strips in Northumberland in the UK. So driving along this road, I could see the two lights in the sky and just assumed it'll be the either side of an aircraft's wings. That's it. And as I drove along a little bit more, they were still there. And you know, you expect something to get closer as you get closer to it and expect it to move. And it just, again, it could be it was dark and everything else. And it looks like it's hovering in the sky. And as I got near, I noticed a white van had pulled over at the side of the road, and I could see the guy in the white van leaning out, looking up. And there was this black triangle hovering. There's a tree line next to it, and the trees maybe are 50 to 100 feet in the air. I'm no expert in distance, so I'll say 50 to 100 feet. So I could tell, and I wouldn't have seen this had those two lights not been on, and you wouldn't have saw the black against the night sky because it was so dark had it not had the two lights. So the first thing I'd done, bear in mind I was driving at 60 miles an hour, was phone my wife. Don't know why, that was my initial reaction. I was driving pretty quick, so I couldn't grab a phone and, camera and country road, it's dark, I'm driving fast. And I drove underneath it, and I just remember looking up, and definitely there was no other lights, no blinking, no nothing, pretty solid triangle. So looking in my rear view mirror, I could still see the two lights. And I pulled onto someone's drive, which is a bit further along, like a little farmhouse type cottage. And as I pulled onto the drive, I'm still talking to my wife saying, there's this thing, it's just sitting in the sky. It's not moving, it's still there. And it's not on the direct flight path to the airport either. It should have turned by now. You don't generally see aircraft at that little strip. So as I was going to come out the house, this old couple approached us because I just drove into their house basically, and they're wondering why I pulled up on their drive. And they're like, "Oh, can we help you?" And I said, "I'm really sorry. I was just turning round and it's a busy road. There's just something hovering in the sky back there." And this older gentleman just kind of looked along and saw it himself. And I remember he laughed and just went, "Oh, well, it just shows you there's other things out there, isn't there? Anyway, have a good night," and walked back in his house. And my wife heard the whole thing. She was laughing. And as I reversed out and back along the road towards it, it had another light come on at the front. and the light was like flashing sporadically. It didn't seem to have a normal repeating pattern. It seemed very strange. I could be misremembering that, but I remember thinking that at the time. It moved off diagonally over the tops of the trees, to which I lost kind of sight of it. But then as I drove along the road, there's a right turn, which then opens up to an expanse of fields, which is then looks over to the airport, in which you would have seen it, and there was nothing. Looking up at the sky, nothing there. Whether the lights had gone off, in which case I wouldn't have seen it, I don't know, or it had gone, but there was nothing. If it had been an aircraft, almost definitely you would have seen it. You would have seen the movement.
You want to think it would have been static in sky. I know you can get a
No.
misrepresentation when you see an aircraft coming towards you and it just look. Do you know what I mean?
It looks like it's hovering. Yeah, I've driven alongside them in a similar way. There's a different approach where aircraft normally take to that local Newcastle airport, and if you're driving at a certain speed on a dual carriageway, it looks like it's just sitting. Especially in the night sky, you just see lights flashing, and it's really interesting. But it's a plane. This just wasn't like that. It wasn't moving. I drove underneath it, and I could see the silhouette. If I hadn't seen that silhouette, I would have never thought anything other than I'll just drive home. But I remember, just to finish that, I got home and I remember saying to my wife, like, I saw this, and I saw it, and I spoke to you, and I didn't know what to do, and I told her about it. And I just remember she said to me, I wish you were as passionate about other things, like your job, for example, as you are about like, UFOs and stuff like this. And I was like, oh, and that kind of stuck with me to the point that when it came the idea to start a podcast, I was like, it was football or UFOs. And there seemed a lot less UFO podcasts out there than football podcasts. So that was the idea behind that UFO podcast. And that second sighting was really the catalyst for it, which, so that was my second and only really big sightings.
And I'm assuming this thing was silent then, Andy.
Yeah, again, I'm inside a car, I had a radio on, but you know when you just get a feeling for noise or ambience, and I get it's the after the fact and people can add stuff in and your mind can play tricks on you, but there's like a feeling to the situation, and you know where it was almost like there was a quiet even though I'm inside the car, and just a strangeness to it.
Yeah.
Nothing more than that. Nothing happened after. I had no high strangeness afterwards. No poltergeist activity. Nothing at all. But there was just in that moment, it did seem like this thing is just sitting in a very strange way. No movement whatsoever.
It's amazing, isn't it? You know, and yeah, obviously, once again, just your gut feeling, something man-made or something other. Something
solid. Because it makes me think about the first one in the 90s being something that potentially wasn't solid or heat or whatever. But this, yeah, it's solid, black triangle, something else. I don't know.
You don't know. Well, no, it's a bit pure speculation. I understand.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
We talked about the first one looking like a Ferris wheel, and some guys visit Bempt. They come a fair old distance, Rick, PJ, and Craig, and they saw something that they likened to a Ferris wheel over at sea. You know, during the early hours of the morning, and that's exactly what he said. It had like little arms coming off it, and it was spinning clockwise manner. You know, but I wonder how many other people see these things, like you said earlier, and just never say a word. You know,
I think it's helped me have those conversations. So, and even when listeners get in touch and they tell me their story, or they'll be apprehensive to say, "I just want to share this if you don't mind." And I would never judge anyone, no matter how extreme the story sounds. And that includes experiencers that claim all sorts of stuff, because I know what I saw, you know, as the James Fox documentary goes. I know what I saw. And I understand why anyone I tell that story to would dismiss or ridicule or not believe it, because why would they? There's no evidence. There's no proof. I could literally have made that up.
Hence the name of my first book, The Truth That Leaves No Proof.
Yeah,
you know, the subtitle, and that's exactly what it is. You know, in mid-1990s, I found myself sat in Bridlington Hospital with 3 holes in my back, which have still got scars to this day. And I knew what had done it, and the doctor's telling me he thinks the laser burns, and I've got the medical, paperwork. We got them, but I think if I'd have told him what I thought had done it that day, I'd have probably been in a jacket. Do you know? And were I lying? He thought my wife had done it.
Mhm.
So, have you got a history? Yeah, you're being physically abused. You couldn't understand how I'd received these wounds, but you just have to draw back. I don't think I could have even talked about it 20 years ago. Well, it was 1997, 98, so it's more. But it's difficult, isn't it? And that probably goes for a lot of people. I've got an avid interest in the subject. Don't mind talking about it. You have, and you don't. But there's lots of people out there that have probably had experiences and sightings a lot more profound than what you saw and what I saw or experienced, and they're going to take them experiences to grave. And and it's sad because it could lead us further down the path to getting some kind of, I don't know, more substantial proof than Paul Sinclair's story or the witnesses that speak to Andy McGrillen. But tell us how podcasts evolved over this period, as in, is it just UFO related now, or do you talk to lots of people on different levels about the paranormal?
Yeah, I don't mind doing little offshoots now and again. I think the conversation largely, if you call it an umbrella topic, the paranormal, whatever that may be, it's all linked in some way, shape, or form. I've never dipped into things like ghosts specifically or anything like that, but I've had remote viewers on. I've had people talking about, Bigfoot, not exclusively, but it's been part of the conversation. And I've just had Mitch Horowitz on, who is an occultist, and he was fascinating, really well-spoken gentleman as well. And he was talking about, the mainstream entering the UFO conversation, the paranormal conversation, talking about ESP, and how it's funny how all these different aspects of the paranormal, if you want to put it under that umbrella, have very similar traits in terms of conversation. It's got they have their stigma, they have their ridicule, they have their hardcore believers, they have their skeptics, and it's just more and more. I think we touched on it before we started recording, Paul, that there's that aspect of social media has opened up so many elements of conversation around the world to people that weren't exposed to it previously. And I think that's where they kind of bleed into each other more and more.
Yeah, overlap, bleed into each other. You're absolutely spot on. But do you think that some of the things that, say, a spiritualist or I've not had much to do with like ghost hunting, and if that's the word to call it, do you think some of the things that they're experiencing are seeing are probably the same things that what ufologists are seeing when we're talking about spheres of light and people are perceiving it? The guys who are hunting ghosts and spirits might be thinking that that's some kind of spirit light. I think we've got that bleed over.
Yeah, it's a few different things. There's the potential that it is the same thing, but there's also potentially, and I'm nowhere near intelligent enough to have those kinds of discussions, but really serious scientists and academics looking at the idea of how our reality works and how our reality is structured. And maybe it's just an artifact left over from somewhere else. Maybe if there are other dimensions running alongside our own, there are those moments in time where wires cross.
Yeah.
And maybe something else has the technology to come from there through to here. All of that is on the table.
Yeah, well, I'm keen on. I've always been keen when I've been writing about saying location is key. I don't know if you share that view, because certain places around the world seem to have a more prolific outpouring of unexplained phenomena than others. I mean, you touched on Skinwalker earlier. We'd probably talk about that at some point before we end this tonight. But do you share that belief? Is that what you've come up with when you're speaking to people?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot of evidence for different locations on the planet having various phenomena hotspots more than others, and it would just go to make sense that is it because there's power grids? Is it because of the natural electromagnetic field of the planet? Is it like, you've got underground subterranean tunnels, so these things are maybe underground and come up? It could be any of the above, it could be none of the above, or it could be a mix. So I do think the location plays a part in it for some reason.
Yeah.
But why, I don't know.
No, I'm saying myself. I mean, I'm beginning to think, a lot of people have said, it's like a sweeping statement. They've said, I think there's an undersea base off the coast of East Yorkshire. I mean, I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but the more reports that I'm getting of people seeing unexplained lights under the water, going back decades and decades, even going back into folklore. There's particular off Filey Brig and, seeing unexplained lights and things they attributed to fiery dragons coming out of the sea into the sky, the terminology from ancient times, probably looking at the same things. So the spheres of light then, and I know I'm asking you things, Andy, that you can't answer. I wouldn't say probably can't, you can't. But what do you think? There's anything structured behind them? You know, we're seeing a lot of orange spheres of light off the east and North Yorkshire coast, and we have done for decades and decades. And my gut feeling is there's something behind them, something inside them, but I've no proof.
I go back and forward on the kind of spherical conversation, and I know a lot of people talk about orbs. And for example, the Bledsoes are probably the biggest case in the world for the Chris Bledsoe and family for seeing these orbs and things. And I think there's a lot online for a start that are just misidentifications. It is dust across a camera.
Yeah.
It is just a flare on the lens, you know, and people send me stuff sometimes and it's like, I can't see there is anything to a lot of it. However, there is something behind some of it. And it does seem to lean more to being non-physical, but as if something's controlling it. Is it a type of very, very advanced futuristic drone? I suppose it would be very easy now with modern drones to make them incredibly bright and send them out there and just confuse people that they couldn't actually tell the shape, what it was, where it was from. But then that doesn't explain why these things have been seen going back centuries and millennia.
I was just going to say that just in logs that I've looked at from Lifeboat and Coast Guard going back decades and decades, they've not evolved for a start. The description is the same. And so I think in that instance, not all instances, we could rule out the drone.
Yeah.
You know, and but it is hard because, and I'm not really but concentrating on photography, and like you just said, dust orbs, and you get a bit of lens flare, and somebody will just crop out the sun and show you this light that they've seen outside of something, but you can see it rays and you know that that's what they've done. I'm talking about actually things that you can see with naked eye that we've seen off the coast and other people see. There's obviously something of substance to them, and they're not just one-dimensional. I saw Steve Ashbridge in chat earlier, and Steve, over years we've been all over the place in search of unexplained phenomena. It's in lonely places, dark, in the darkness, at stupid o'clock. We've done it for years and years. And, you know, we've seen these things from different directions. I mean, one night I was driving home from Caton after I'd been to my daughter's, and Steve, it gets to Steve this, and that's about 8 miles from where I live. And I've got a camera in back of the car, and there's he might, if he's still in chat, he'll tell me I'm wrong here. It was sort of eyelash-shaped spheres of light in the sky over the sea. We looking towards Bempton, but I'm looking like 8 miles away. And shall I stop the car? Shall I try and get my wife home? Leave her? Because like your wife, she's not interested. She wants to thank me for driving straight to Bempton and standing on cliff tops in dark. Or shall I park up and film them? I chose the first one and I drove home. But during the journey, Steve rings me. Paul, there's lights over the sea he thought they were over Hornsey, which is where he lives. The total distance between two places where we were would have been probably 25, 30 miles. But they looked exactly the same to Steve as what they looked to me. And we're looking at them from different perspectives. You know, do you know? So it's not just some light coming towards you like you'd see a torch beam, and then you'd not stood at the back of it. So don't know what that proves. I don't know what it means, people. But like you said earlier, there's people far more intelligent than me that work that one out, and it's probably easy, but it's not in Paul's head. So yeah, there's
a similar story though that really interested me was I've got Colm Kelleher and George Knapp and James Lukatsky's book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And speaking to Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, they shared a story, and they have done on various other shows as well, of a pretty prominent figure within some of these programs who was driving along, I think, with his daughter in a car out in the US and saw 3 balls of light. I think they were blue in the story. I might be getting some facts wrong, so apologies, folks. But the light came towards him, small baseball-sized ball of light, came in through the car window, passed through his shoulders and out the car. And in a short time later, he developed a very rare form of cancer, which they managed to actually find and treat, which was really lucky. But there's an example of one of these objects seeming to be physical, but passing through someone, having that kind of maybe transmedium ability. coming through them, but then causing an illness afterwards, whether that was direct or indirect, maybe just a consequence of the state of matter this thing creates, that it causes harm to our physiology, which is probably the case. Same with a lot of UFO sightings as well. So I find that fascinating, and it makes you wonder, is there something behind it? Is it like some sort of drone, but a different life form's drone? It's
Yeah.
something a sentinel they have sent out to check another planet, because we would do the same. And
Yeah.
it just seems like a much more efficient way of doing that as well.
And extremely harmful if it comes into contact with us, or you know, some life form. Because years ago, and I'm probably going back 15 years now, we're in contact with a guy from Lewis, Isle of Lewis, and he was claiming to see lights, a crofter up on a croft. And his dog went towards one of the lights, and he claimed his dog developed cancer after being in really close proximity to the lights. I mean, it could have just been coincidence that his dog developed cancer, but once again, that's this guy's assumption after that happening. And just staying with Highlands, do you get any reports from there, or is it mainly the people that you interview in the podcast, or do you get people sending you UFO reports, unexplained phenomena reports as a whole?
Yeah, from all over now, to be honest. I think the most recent local-ish type one in the UK was Falkirk. Someone sent me a sighting from Falkirk. It was just typical lights, nothing more to it. There was no video, nothing like that. I've never had anything, I don't think, from that far north. I get a lot of reports from the US. Just had a trucker from the US who does long distance trucking across the states. I think it was Montana, just remembering back to the call. And he was talking about all the things he's seen over the years. Has an interest in the subject, but he makes the point of that he's done 2 million driving miles across the various states. So of course he's going to look up at the skies all the time. So he's much more likely to see things more than the common person, or even you or I, Paul, with an interest in the subject. If you're going out to location, that's great. But he's literally putting in millions of miles in distance
every day
across massive empty expanses. So he's seen quite a lot, which is really interesting as well. So yeah, I get stuff from all over. I usually try to send it on to other people far more knowledgeable or capable than myself in terms of analytics. And you'll know our probably mutual friend, colleague Jason Gleaves. I've sent some stuff to him that's maybe video or photographic for him just to run his more professional eye over, or others in the US as well. But I appreciate anyone who sends me anything. I'm always happy to listen. But I know there's better folks out there than me that can kind of maybe give them some interesting
feedback. We will be having
Jason
on podcast in a few weeks' time, actually. I was speaking to him the other day. So, I mean, you can highly recommend him. He's an interesting guy, Jason.
He is, yeah.
With an experience of his own. So, you know, it's really good. So, just to labour on this trucker, what did he say? Or do you not want to go into any detail with it?
Purely through lack of memory. That one's coming out in the next week or two anyway. That's not a way to advertise or hype it. You know, people can go and listen. But he did share quite a few stories. A lot of different lights in the sky. I'm sure one of them is a bigger rectangular type object. Again, he was driving me across kind of very vast open expanses. And he said he could see the lights in one particular direction, miles away. And then next thing they'd be over a different direction, so that you could tell they were traveling huge distances in very short periods of time.
Interesting then. Did he see them move, or did they just switch off and appear in another location?
Both.
Right. Because that's what we're seeing. You know, you'll see 1, 2, 3, they're there. Then you're sort of questioning where they've gone, and they're over there. Do you remember the 6 miles away down coast at Filey? And I don't know that it's speed and it's just too fast for us to comprehend, or whether actually are switching off, or there's another 3. It's difficult to say, isn't it? But equally fascinating. What do you think then we'll just go back to the Foo Fighters. We've not touched on Foo Fighters. Do you think these are the same things that we're looking at when we're seeing these spheres of light?
Potentially, yeah. And I know you've had Graham Rendell, a friend and colleague of mine, on in the past too, who's absolutely the expert in that subject. And Graham's great to listen to, and his books are fantastic as well. Graham has done some great talks on it too, and I've learned a lot from him. And again, it would make sense to me that if they were almost, again, drone type objects, and I get not drones as we have them, but something else sending out some kind of sentinel to look and observe and watch, then during a war type situation, You wouldn't want to send out anything physical just in case you do get shot down or shot at, or why not send out little balls of energy or large balls of energy to tag pilots, fly alongside them, zip about, and generally cause a little bit of chaos? I'd believe, yeah, why not? Why would it not be one in the same type of phenomena?
And with Graham's research, like you said, because he goes in depth with it, doesn't he? And like absolutely brilliant books, but the descriptions haven't changed, have they? They're very similar to what we're seeing today. So it's either some kind of very old technology, or it doesn't have to update itself. It's just that far in advance of anything we can sort of get a grip on,
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that, and I'm going to try and remember the second part being, okay, I'm just going to make a note of a keyword just so I remember it. But the first part, with the technology, with the technology, people would argue now a lot of the recent sightings, the Tic Tac stuff, the Omaha, the Russell, all of those types of objects, it could be Chinese drones, airborne clutter, to quote the New York Times recent article from Julian Barnes. And that's fine. A lot of these modern day sightings, especially from a military point of view, no doubt are just advanced technologies or secret technologies from another country. That's fine. But none of that, like I mentioned earlier, goes back to explain what was seen 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago, because these types of very advanced objects were around back then. I could believe, at a stretch, the Chinese have developed some incredible technology that they have a Tic Tac type object. Okay, that's fine. There's a stretch there, but say they've got that. They didn't have that 60 years ago or 70 years ago when these things were still being reported back then. So what were those? Whose were those? And I think that's what you can kind of bring yourself back to in this conversation when people are trying to debunk, not trying to debunk, because some things are there to be debunked, and that's not a bad thing. But if they're being skeptical, especially about some of this stuff that we're getting more and more military reports out these days, a lot of it is going to be just misidentified objects, or quite interesting, but still secret human technology. There's plenty of stuff there that can't be identified or have shown a lot of anomalous traits as well. So that to me is pretty fascinating. There's also the other aspect of it that if some of this stuff is doing what these people say, and it is Chinese, Russian, or US, then at what point did they start to break the laws of physics as we understand them? That they've got objects that can do anti-gravity, transmedium travel, and do all these incredible things that these pilots are seeing.
We've got objects that, once again, reported over decades and decades, seen leaving the sea, seen entering the sea. And apart from a missile launched from a submarine, and we know end game for that, we've not got anything that's going to return to the sea and leave the sea and under its own free will, as these things seem to be doing. We've got a lot of reports about it, of these, and I know I'm sort of banging on about East and North Yorkshire, but I imagine it's all around the world. It's just getting out there and getting these reports. But before we move on to a few more things of interest from yourself, Andy, let's see whether Les has got any questions.
Yes, thanks for a great, interesting show from you guys tonight, and we have got a few questions in. But I'd like to get one in myself, Andy. You just to pick up on something you said earlier, just played devil's advocate, as it were. And so the question is, you mentioned 60, 70 years ago they didn't have this type of technology. Speaking of the Chinese, you were saying, we have had guests on here who've said the military is 50, 60, maybe 100 years in front of what we know there is now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of numbers. You could say 10, you could say 200 years. I think the general consensus from experts that come out is 30 years. I believe the technology's 30 years more advanced than what we see now. And I could well believe that, in the same way that if the US, the Chinese, or the Russians, it's always the three superpowers, have some kind of military expo, the 2022 expo, here's our latest fighter jet. That's not the latest fighter jet. And why would you parade that and display it? I would struggle to believe I've got things 100 years advance of where we are, because one of the arguments would be, if, again, for example, the Chinese have Tic Tac technology and the US and Russia know that, then China win. That's it. They are the superpower, because at a moment's notice, with no harm to them at all and penetration that can be done nothing about, they can put nuclear bombs over any city or any location on the planet without the US or Russia doing anything about it.
You
So
make a
why don't
great
they do it?
point. Yeah.
Why don't the US do that right now? Why don't the Russians do it in Ukraine? Why send tens of thousands of men to their death with equipment that's old and degraded when one of those tic tacs can finish that war for you like that? That would make sense to me.
Absolutely brilliant point. And you know, I've said this on similar lines regarding the triangles, which have been seen not just from the 90s. I mean, John Hanson's got reports from early 1900s of huge black triangles. If these were ours, why aren't we using them now to settle conflict? Why aren't we? Do you know, it doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, I believe there's something other than man-made technology, the triangle sightings. But has that answered your question, Les?
Yeah, that's a great perspective on that, Andy, and thanks for that. I've got a question from Patricia Adams-Wright. Welcome to the show, Patricia. Does Andy ever get upset when he listens to his experiences, stories?
When he
Okay. Thanks for the question, Patricia. It's my mum's name. No, I don't tend to have a lot. I don't tend to have a lot of emotion anyway. For people who may or may not know me, so no. I don't get upset, stressed, anxious, really on stuff. So no, and I'll take anything people tell me at face value. I appreciate anything. I would never deny or. There's people I agree with. There's things that sound very, very fantastic and difficult for me to understand it actually happening. But I then just have to remind myself that, you know, I've seen a couple of things, especially that first one in the 90s, that is just too incredible for me to say it was something easily understandable or explainable. But I know why other people would dismiss that offhand as well. So yeah, nah, I've never been upset or emotional really about other stuff.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got one from Andrew Sheehan. Did Andy notice any noise coming from the craft? And I think this question came in very early, so it'll be your first account that he's referring to.
The first one, no. Again, there was no deathly silence. We were probably a quarter of a mile, half a mile away from it. Again, I'm no expert in distance, but I could measure it if I wanted because I go back to that area regularly just because it's where my family live. But I'll post it on Google Maps actually later on. I've got a copy of the area, but no, there was no kind of noise. But even in the sense if it was something that was mechanical or human, or there would have been some kind of buzz from there because it wasn't that far away. So if it was some type of fair or fairground, one, I would have known about it because I live local to it. But two, there was nothing at all. No.
And my last question for this session is from Alison Buttle. Hi Andy, what do you think about the Men in Black?
Fantastic movie with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. I remember going to see it in the cinema back in the 90s, very early 90s. I do think, having spoken to enough people, that there are some type of Men in Black type scenario. And while I joke about it, I don't think it's necessarily to the extent of a, you know, intergalactic police force keeping us safe. I think any government worth its salt to have an interest or an experience or exposure to crashed craft or alien visitation or non-human, you know, interference would have some sort of department set up that you would send a few folks out to go and investigate, you know, oh, Mr. Sinclair, so you saw something recently, did you? And we're quite interested in what you saw, maybe because they have tracked something coming in off the coast of, you know, North Yorkshire or East Yorkshire, and they just want to kind of follow up on that themselves. So I think that's something that has happened and does happen because there's too many accounts of that through the years. So definitely Men in Black, is it a thing? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Andy, and I'll leave it with you guys.
Yeah. Do you know Bob Brown, who comes up onto cliff tops with me? Well, we probably go four times a week. Bob's in his 70s, and he don't really get phased or frightened much. And he had what he claims were a Men in Black experience. 2017, I think it was August 2017. It definitely shook him up. It rattled him, whatever it was. And this is about you, Andy, so I'll not go into too much detail, but it was at the height of when there were the animal mutilations, there were UFO activity, there were the lights seen under the sea, the military vehicles were on the cliff tops. It was in the middle of all that. And Bob works at a charity shop, you not mind me saying. Well, I think it's admirable, to be honest with you, because he's up early and he's always there. But walking to work on a morning, he'd been commenting for I won't say weeks, but I don't know, quite a while, that there's a black car, a huge black car, a big old, like, American type car, passed him a few times. And when he's walking back on a night, it's there again. Couldn't understand it. Didn't feel threatened, didn't feel anything. This time he said he took this dog for a walk on the beach and seen what he called a UFO, unexplained light on the beach early one morning. And he was house sitting for a guy. And he said he sat there in the darkness, watching TV, the dog's outside of him, huge enclosed garden, Cardigan Road, this, in Bridlington. Not that anybody's going to know unless you live in Bridlington, people, but there you go, that's Paul. So he says, suddenly, the dog looked up. He said, now look, and in the silhouette at the window in the darkness, there's a guy with a hat on looking at me. Can't see a face, just see the shape. Dog goes mad at the door. There's a conservatory and a window and doors before you get to that, so it's outside. Lets the dog out. It's running around the garden like a maniac, just barking. There's nothing there. That rattled him. He told me that. And then I'm not going to go into time span. I've got the dates, but because Bob is meticulous, he keeps a diary of everything strange that happens when we go up onto the cliffs. But I can't remember off the top of my head. But he says, I know it was World Darts Championship, which was being held in Bridlington, so people can date it from that. So there's another bit of useless news, people. But there's a knock at the door, the front of the house, and there's once again you've got two glass doors and you've got a little porch about 2 or 3 foot wide. People come in, take the shoes off, and clear glass at that side. He says they can see the outline of 2 people. Dog's going mad. So they're tall, and his immediate thoughts were they were police, just with stature, and even though he couldn't see them through this Flemish glass, and sort of opened the door. Went into the porch, and there's 2 blokes looking at him, down at him, and it typically said they'd got fedora hats on, suits, faces, complexion of sort of flower, real white, and they wanted to speak to him. He opened the door a little bit, and he says that, I don't remember exact words, but they told him he'd seen something, or something had happened, and they wanted to speak to him, and he became frightened and shut the door. He says, I ran upstairs. Bob will not mind me saying it. Bob don't run anywhere, but he says, I ran upstairs. So, and he got to the bedroom and overlooking the Cardigan Road, see down it, right and left. There's nobody there. But what was more confusing for Bob, it was dark. He said it was light when he went to the door. Now, I know Bob's slow, but it don't, you know what I mean? He's not.
Yeah.
So, just an interesting story. Do Men in Black exist? Is Bob exaggerating? I don't know. My gut feeling is he isn't. He's, I've known Bob a lot of years. He don't sort of elaborate. We go up onto them cliff tops, Andy, and we can spend 6 months up there, and you'll not see me writing on Facebook Monday morning when I've been up Sunday night that something happened and this was weird and we got this overwhelming feeling, because it just doesn't happen. We go up there for months and months and months with nothing, not even a hint of anything unusual. So. Yeah, just to labour on a bit with the Men in Black story, that's just what I was thinking when it came into my head. I think there is some substance to these beings or these people. Maybe not beings. Maybe, like you said, maybe it's just people sent to intimidate because he had seen something he shouldn't have seen. I don't know.
Well, there's the footage from the Canadian hotel at Niagara Falls, where apparently about the only footage of a man in black apparently has been caught. Yeah, spoken to a few people, like Canadian investigators, about that. Howard Hughes, radio broadcaster in the UK, he claims to have had his own sort of Man in Black type experience.
Correct. Howard's told me.
Dan Aykroyd, actor, one of the Ghostbusters, he's talked about how they kind of had Man in Black type experience that stopped a series going ahead on TV on the UFO topic. So, yeah, for me, there's a lot of those stories out there, and there's that element though of one. I would lean on the side of it being a intimidation tactic. Normal folks like us who are in a job and employment in a government, and their job is to go and do what they do. But like you say, you've then got your friend's story where there seems to be some element of, is it the paranormal, missing time, some sort of ability where why would they not look outside and see a car with the headlights on? That would be what you would expect, but you see nothing.
The next morning when he got up, because he were house sitting, which is another strange element, because if people knew, let's assume that it's just intimidation, they'd have to just hit it all right to know that Bob were house sitting for a week. Or do you know what I mean? While this guy went on holiday and watching his dog. Yeah, that happened. And he said, when I got up the next morning, all the power were off. I had to go into the cellar to get power back on.
Yeah.
And he got up, and he's always up early. I mean, Bob lives in one of our flats, so if I get up at ridiculous time, 5:30, you can guarantee if you look up, Bob will be, his lights on. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He's always up early. But yes, a strange one. You know, there's another guy in Bempton, Peter. I'll not say his surname, and I think we're going back to probably 2015, and he were walking down with his wife, red hot day, shorts and t-shirts on, and they walked up Cliff Lane, which goes to the cliffs, and they took a right and went on to what's called Blake Howe Lane, Black Burial Mound. Unexplained phenomena reported over not just decades, a long time on this particular lane. And when we say lane, it's literally a dirt track. You'd have to have a mountain bike to go down it, you know, and they're just walking down. Red hot day. In Peter's words, it were cracking flags, it were that hot, you know, flags. And they're walking, they're off towards the sea. You walk down it, then you'd take a left and you'd go down straight to Bempton Cliffs. Nothing there. He says, and we're sort of talking, and he said, I think they said they'd seen a kestrel or something. They're looking at it, and when they looked again, there's a guy in front of them. Long dark jacket, fedora hat. I mean, I had to prize this information out of him. I'd worked with Pete probably 30 years ago, and we touched on things, but never this story. And I remember it took a bit of getting out of him, but he were good enough to tell me. So we can't work it out. He says, we're absolutely sweltering. It's a red hot day, and there's this guy in long coat, sort of suit type trousers and a fedora hat just walking in front of us. Went up a bit of a rise and went down. When they got over at top, he'd gone. He says, when we walked down, he says, there's just fields at either side of us. Will said there were corn in one and the yellow rapeseed in the other. I don't know what, but there's crop.
Yeah.
He says, and we walked down it, we walked up. He says, my wife was convinced he'd collapsed. He said, but there was nobody there. I mean, there's no proof of anything there, Andy, is there? Let's face it. But just once again, a strange story. And he had no experience or nothing to suggest that anything weird would happen. But yeah, they're just a strange one.
Can I just add something there, guys? I'd like to know why these men in black just come from a certain decade of time and no other time.
You mean the dress code? Yeah.
It's pretty plain, nondescript, isn't it? It's the hat, the coat. So yeah, and it's, I suppose, like you talk about these technologies being, you know, they have not changed in X amount of time. I don't know if you watched the Project Blue Book series on Sci-Fi.
No.
Do you know what? I quite enjoyed it as a guilty pleasure. I thought it was the closest thing. As much as it was highly fictionalized and Hollywood, you know, had the Hollywood treatment, it was really interesting, and I thought that they'd done it really well. And I was really disappointed it never got renewed again. But the portrayal of the Men in Black and that, or the idea that these folks are meant to be the Men in Black was they were kind of non-human type entities who were here, and you wondered again, is that a real possibility? And that would obviously explain why Bob's story did go the way it went, that you do have potentially non-human intelligences or humans not from this point in time who are just there through different periods of time. And that's something going back to what we were saying, Paul, about these objects looking like they're turning on and off. Are they traveling great speeds, or are they appearing in one place and appearing in another? If these objects experience time in a completely different way to we do, or that they can manipulate time in a completely different way to we do, then that would explain why objects look like they're moving fast, why they appear in one place or another. It even, for me, explains a lot of abductions going back through generations. And for all you might wonder, why am I being abducted? My son, you know, my grandfather, my father, and my great-grandfather. Why would aliens or a non-human intelligence be interested in my family over 150 years? But maybe for them, it's not 150 years. Maybe for them, it's half an hour. Yeah. And you know what? They nip in and they visit your great-grandfather. They then go back in whatever object and craft they've got, and they nip to see your father. Then for them, 5 minutes passes and they see you. But for your family, these experiences last 150 years. And again, over that time, you're going to report the same technologies, the same things. You're going to report the same sounds, you know, the same types of labels on these things.
Yeah, yeah.
But for them, it's not 150 years worth of technology, because for them, maybe time isn't that relevant. So that's always one that helps me kind of think and wrap my head around why we're seeing these things over such a long time. And maybe that explains the dress code as well. maybe the like the 50s.
Great way of looking at it. Who do you think has broke new ground in the last 20 years? Subjects. Well, let's throw it out there. Not just UFOs. Let's unexplained phenomena. But I know primarily you're interested in the subject of UFOs.
I think you're very hard pressed. I suppose it depends in what sense. Like I would look up at the minute to from a journalism point of view. You've got George Knapp going back 30 years, who largely is associated with the Bob Lazar case, but has ploughed a lone furrow in the US in many ways, reporting from a serious journalistic point of view the UFO and other related paranormal topics. You've then got Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper, who wrote that article back in December 2017 for the New York Times, to a lot of professional ridicule as well. I'm interviewing Leslie Kane on Saturday night about that. And again, these are like Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, you know, that are coming out and reporting on something that was ridiculed up to a few years ago. On the other side of it, it gets a lot of hate. People can love him or hate him, whatever it is, but people like Lou Elizondo came out and really changed the course of the UFO conversation, for good or for bad. That'll be told within the test of time, I'm sure. But from 2017, a lot changed, and I think it's very hard to look past that, because for me, it seemed for like a long time we had the same stories of the same events going over the same old ground, the same VHS or DVDs being released on the same talking head interviews. And it just seems in the last 5 years, and this is maybe a little bit that social media generation, that we've been spoiled with the amount of news, stories, you know, reports that have come out and are still coming out, that there's almost just too much to go through. And we probably won't appreciate this until further down the line, when we can look back and say, God, do you remember that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years?
Like a golden period.
Yeah.
So just to stay with Leslie Kane, because I don't mean obviously, but I would have thought you've done a little bit of research. So can we just break in a little bit of that?
Can do, yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what she wrote about then, and our listeners. And me as well, because I live in this bubble and I don't really read about other people, to be honest. So it's good to hear.
For the first time, Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper, all three of them co-authored an article in December 2017 in the New York Times that confirmed for the first time ever officially the US government did indeed have a UFO program. While it was something many of us suspected for a long time, there was no direct admission of an interest in the UFO subject from the official US government, and those three broke that ground. And the US, the Pentagon, Department of Defense came out and admitted, yes, we have had a UFO program from 2012 to 2017. It was called ATIP. This is what it investigated. It investigated what we know as UFOs, UAP, and Leslie and Ralph, to their credit, Helene stayed away from the subject after that, it seems, put themselves out there. Leslie has an interest in the paranormal as well. She's got a really successful Netflix series on the afterlife and a Surviving Death, I believe it's called. So she has an interest in some of this other aspects of the paranormal as well. So Leslie, Ralph, both fascinating characters. Ralph's been on the podcast twice if people wanted to go back and check that out. Really serious, hard-nosed journalists. New York Times is seen as one of the pinnacles of that field. Yeah. So to get those types of articles front and center out there to the mainstream, I think for any of us with a serious interest in the UFO subject, that's a dream. That's a milestone to see those, because for me, that headline, that front page is up there with the Roswell front page we all know and love so well.
Yeah.
That's a groundbreaking moment for me. And it kicked open the door to the mainstream getting involved in this conversation. And yeah, the door closed over a bit. I don't think it fully closed this time. And I think we've got that kind of crack in the door where we've still got scientists, academics, journalists. Yeah, they're looking in and going, is there something to this I should be getting involved in?
So I think we've got it as much.
Yeah.
So Leslie Keane, what did you say she calls it? Surviving Death?
Yeah, there's a Netflix series. She's got a few books on the afterlife. It's not a subject I'm massively au fait with or necessarily interested in directly.
During your bit of research you've done into it, does she think that this is related to the afterlife?
I've not looked into it enough to say there's that direct correlation, but I think there's enough other people having those conversations, isn't there, that is there something to the idea of consciousness? What is a soul? Does it survive life after death? Again, this is something in the last couple of years I've looked at more, the idea that abductions can be non-physical. That, you know, you say your friend Bob lives pretty close to you there, Paul.
Yeah.
That you could physically be standing over Bob in his bed while he sleeps, and Bob could be being abducted, and you would never see him leave his bed.
Yeah.
Is there the idea that if there is a separate consciousness or soul, is it that can be interacted with in a way that the brain and the human body, the physical body, is just a receiver, and that's why some of these abductions happen? That maybe you're left with some marks, maybe you're not. And I think, again, that goes back to what we said about this whole topic and other aspects of the paranormal having a connection.
Do you know the night in 1990? I think it was 1997. I'm not sure. It could have been 98 when the holes appeared in my back. I was screaming in pain. I don't know whether I was making any sound, but my wife was outside of me. Absolutely, unless she were doing it. No knowledge whatsoever until I woke up the next morning and sat on the edge of bed, and she said, "I don't believe it. You've got 3 holes in your back." How did that happen when I'm laid on my back? And I don't recall leaving that bedroom at all. I've not got no memories ever myself of traveling anywhere. It's always been wherever I've been sort of situated in wherever I've lived. In childhood at Doncaster, it's always been within that room where everything's happened. Unless that's something that's been imprinted in your mind and you're not actually there, I don't know. But like you said, the non-physical, that if these things are real, if these things are happening to people, and through my own experience, I believe they are, but you've only got my word for that. But you've got people talking about traveling through walls, and we're somehow being made non-physical, or are we still there? And it's another essence, another part of us, the soul that's leaving. I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? You know, it's all things you play with in your mind and just run these scenarios through and through, and you're never going to get, well, I'm never going to get an answer, I don't feel. But,
and do you know what? You could do a wonderful diagram, I think, a spider diagram of, and you could write UFOs, demons, angels, ghosts, cryptids, Bigfoot, and you could have them all separate and just start drawing lines to UFOs. Okay, abductions. Okay, physical, non-physical, ghosts, and then all of a sudden the lines would start connecting out through the line in the diagram. So I think more and more, there's definitely a lot of proof that it's one huge phenomenon that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, it'd be good if we'll use this word loosely, researchers or interested parties could perhaps get on and agree to disagree on some things.
Yeah.
You know, knowing that what they're saying might not be entirely correct, but they might have a little grain of truth unknowingly in what they're talking about. Me included. You know what I mean? I'm not labeling myself as any different to anybody here, but sort of it might help join the dots a little bit. But you've still got. I know things are improving, and I know we've got this sort of overlap, and we're now seeing it as multi-phenomena. It's a multifaceted kind of subject that we're involved in, but you've still got this stigma attached to the people in some places. It's got to be a UFO that you can tap on side, and it's nuts and bolts. And you know, and it's a shame. I don't know how we'd break that, do you?
I think at the minute, a very, very up-to-date example would be Graham Hancock's series on Netflix, Ancient Apocalypse, that I'm working my way through just now. And I know Graham Hancock gets a lot labelled at him or thrown at him from the scientific and archaeological communities, that it's pseudoscience and nonsense and there's no real evidence behind it. I think there's enough there in Graham's presentations and research and investigations that there's something worth looking at. There's a there, I think, is a very common and popular phrase at the moment. And for me, you've got people like Graham who are trying to present something else, but maybe can be a bit hard-nosed in his own approach, that it's definitely this. And then you've got folks on the other side, like traditional archaeologists who, nope, this is human history, this is what happened, the Ice Age, bang, 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 that's it. And maybe, like you say, maybe you've both got a bit of the truth in there. And if you could just meet in the middle and go and find out, go and investigate. And again, bringing it back to UFOs, that's for me where if you could get real scientists involved, real academics, of which there are some on both sides, so don't get me wrong with that. If you could get more of that involvement, more funding, more serious research, more mainstream documentaries, more serious news programs, you know, for us in the UK, can you imagine 9 o'clock BBC News, 9 o'clock ITV, where they have a serious top story, no laughing, no giggling, no X-Files music, UFOs, and then just someone doing a hard-hitting piece on it. That, for me, would be real progress. Yeah. And like you say, it's trying to get that middle ground, I think, to see that.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Les if there's any more questions now, Andy. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think you've spoilt it for our show there, Andy, because we was going to play the X-Files music at the end of our programme. No, seriously. I'm just going to ask a question a little bit out of order here, but because it's just something that topic that we've just left on, I want to keep it in there. Steve Ashbridge is asking you, Paul, do you think the man from Recall was something similar to the Men in Black? And for those who don't know about the Recall man, if you can just give a little brief.
Yeah. Well, it was strange. Let's put it that way. Thanks, Steve. You know, one of my best friends is Steve, and why I didn't think of that when we were talking about Bob's story. I've told this quite a few times, but are you good to listen to this, Andy? Because it's about you mainly, but I'm going to do it. My kids give me their phones, 4 girls, and usually I get their hand down phones. I got an HST phone, needed unlocking, decided on this cold winter's day, but it was sunny, to take the phone to be unlocked. So me and Mary, we left our house just before dinner, I think, and the street fans out into like a big fan, and you've got the barbers at the bottom and the news agents. And as we leave the house, almost immediately, this guy starts shouting at me across the road, and he's leant on the wall about 50 yards away, a green bike at the side of him, sort of treacle tin colour green, and he's got no shirt on, and it's freezing. It's sunny, but it's cold. What I didn't know was the guys in the barber's shop, John, and we've spoke about it many times afterwards, he's still there. If anybody wants to ask if I'm not telling the truth here, they'd been observing him because he looked so unusual. So he's shouting at me, and he's shouting, "You're bringing down the light. You know what you're doing. You're causing trouble. You need to stop." But I didn't take that in at the time. I'd just left the house, and I'm thinking he's on about the sunshine. And I just said, "Yeah, enjoy it, mate. We've not got many days left like this." Walk to have the phone unlocked. Try and be as quick as I can here, guys, because we want to get back to Andy. Did that, left the phone, coming back, and I'd even considered going back other way, which is unusual for me. I'm not tall, I'm only 5'6". I'm 60-year-old now, but I don't shy away from trouble. I don't cause it, but I won't walk away from it either, and I never have done. But anyway, for some reason, I'd considered walking back other way because he would a bit weird. So anyway, we didn't. We walked back round, and he's on our side of the road now. He's got his back to us, and he's got a tight-fitting brown jumper on, bald head. But I knew it were him because he were quite in shape, but there weren't much vascularity to his body. He looked like an action man. Skin looked like Spam. So anyway, I said to Mary, I said, "Oh God," I said, "he's there now, that bloke." I said, "He's there." And I carried on. Before, just as I get to him, he turned. And so we're there, and he went, "You know what you're doing? You've got to stop. You're bringing down the light. You're causing big problems. You must stop bringing down the light." And I think, what's this guy on about? And we've spoke about quite a few things, and every time I tried to get a grip of what he was saying and say something to counter him, not sarcastic, but I think in a sort of clever to counter, it just got me nuts. I couldn't go out with this guy. Conversationally anyway, he just beat me to it every time. So I'm facing him, and Mary's I'm here, Mary's there, and this guy's in front of me. And I'm looking, he's about 5'8". He's got full wraparound sunglasses on, bald head, this tight-fitting jumper. And I'm looking at his skin. I can't work out how old he is. Can't see his eyes. And he's constantly telling me I should, I'm bringing down the light. So at one point, he just reached out and touched Mary's shoulder. And it was just that moment when I'm thinking, right, I'm going to grab your hand. That's it. And we'd be rolling around the floor. And I knew that I wouldn't have got the better of this. So we're not an hero here. It would have been too much for me. But and he took his hand straight away, and he went, "I'm not talking to her. I'm talking to you. You know what you're doing. You're bringing down the light." So anyway, I don't know, a moment in time passed, and we'd had enough, and we walked away. Straight back in, looked on CCTV, he'd gone. Mary said to me afterwards, because she didn't speak through any of this, she said she was facing his bike. Oh, I asked him where he was from. He said, "Recall." Well, I didn't remember it at the time. We were questioning, where did he say he was from? Where did he say? We couldn't remember. But that'll come in a moment. It'll only take 2 minutes this now, guys. Mary says, "I'm looking over the road at his bike." She says it had no brakes. On handlebars, it had nothing. So there was nothing on it. It was just a green bike with wheels and pedals. So I don't know, a few weeks later, we opened the Bridlington Free Press up and there's a man gone missing at Bempton. He's vanished. And it weren't this man, by the way. I could see the picture of this guy that had gone missing and it weren't him. But what were interesting was, we both said it was from Rickle, which is in North Yorkshire. So that's the place we knew. So sorry for labouring on that one, but Steve asked it and we thought we'd throw it out there. What are you, man in black type figure? I've no idea. He didn't conform with the dress code, let's put it that way. But he did look unusual. He all physical attributes of somebody really, really fit looking, but none of the vascularity that would go with it. And it was just plastic. It was weird, spam type texture. So sorry about that, Andy, because we're supposed to be talking to you. That's Steve's fault. We'll blame Steve.
No, it was a good question. Good. It's your show, mate.
Yeah. No, listen, I'm all about the guest, but no, I'm only joking. So go on.
If I can get a question in for Andy, this one, I think. Let's have a look. Patricia Adams Wright is asking, since the early days of the podcast, what's the most important thing you've learned, do you think?
Good question,
Andy?
Pat.
God, make sure I've got the right microphone settings on for a start. I've done that a few times, but I think she probably means a little bit deeper than that, I'm sure, not a technical point of view.
Andy, for anybody who knows this show, I'm vindicated there.
Yeah, aye, we've done it. And Dan, who comes on the podcast, the same thing, used to always leave himself on mute. Those days are gone. I think he doesn't do that anymore. So I think even if I disagree with people, I think you've got to let them have their opinion. And I think you touched on this earlier, Paul, that people need to learn to disagree far better, especially for the love of God on social media. It's Paul, at the recent expo we were at in Manchester, I shared a little analogy and it came to me on the spot, and I was just kind of ranting, I think, about social media at the time. And I love social media, but there are so many types of people on there now. There's so many opinions that in the past wouldn't have been allowed to share opinions to a mass audience, but they can do it now from a keyboard, which is always fascinating to read and see. And we've all been guilty of it, I think, anger typing. But I talked about, especially UFO social media, it's, if the world is a big room and a hall, imagine there's lots of doors around that hall. And what social media is that there's a little door, and in this room is a very, 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 very small section of society, but they're all shouting at each other, thinking it's really important, thinking if they shout the loudest, and they're all having the same conversations with each other. And every now and again, someone breaks out the room and gets to go into the big wide world and talk about the UFO topic to a bigger audience, a grander audience, and maybe a bit more sensible. And I just wish more people could come out the room and stop just shouting at each other, and from that social media aspect. So for me, it's been able just to listen to everyone and say, look, everyone can have their say. We're all allowed opinions. I've got lots of people in this topic I respect. I don't necessarily agree with most of what they say, but there's also people that I've maybe got less respect for that I still feel have a valid point or valid opinion. And I've said before, Dr. Stephen Greer, I think at one time done a lot of good work in the UFO arena, but I think that was a long time ago. And I think since then things changed for him. And I know a lot of people share that same opinion, but a lot of people hold him to very high regard still as well. So, but for me, I think that's it. I respect what he's done in the past, but I don't have to agree. And anyone else is exactly the same. Just have a bit more respect for each other. That's it. So I think, and I hope that answers Patricia's question.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you.
And
obviously another question, Les, but I just want to come back to that in a bit regarding Rendlesham Forest and all the disagreements there. But let's go with Les's questions.
A question from Natalia Moore. I think I pronounced her first name correct there. Andy, what are the two scariest encounters you know of?
I know of. Scariest? Oh, I don't know if I'll need to come back to that one. That's a thinker. Scariest that I know of. Do you know what? Some of the sleep paralysis, and this is a generic type, but whenever someone talks to me about sleep paralysis, you mentioned even, Paul, yourself and your experience, waking up in bed, were you screaming in pain, but no one could hear it? And I've had that before as well, that I'm trying to shout my wife's name, but nothing's coming out. Is it just a really vivid dream? Because I get those, I get lucid dreams, or was I actually awake? And I know other people that do have sleep paralysis as an issue and a condition. And I always find that pretty terrifying, the idea that there's an entity, whether it be an alien type figure, a demon, something, a spirit in a room, but you can't move, and it's there.
I've just wrote down, same as you, I just write little things down to prompt me. So I just stay with that, because I wrote down incubus. Because why do you think then sleep paralysis, not in every instance, but I would say 90% of them, we don't, if we even have a percentage, I don't know, but they see some kind of demon, some kind of old hag. Why are they seeing that? I'm not expecting an answer, Andy, but I don't know.
Oh, it'd be a terrible show if I never gave you an answer. So I think in terms of what they see, I'm not too sure on that, but I think there are just manifestations of things that when you're in that halfway between dreaming and being awake, we talk about those non-physical abductions. I think if you are going down the route of consciousness being so important in all of this, and what is a soul, and what is the human consciousness, and what is that experience, are dreams just a way of accessing another reality, and you do go somewhere in a non-physical sense to some other time and place, and you just see glimpses of that in a dream format? And then is it just that being between being awake and asleep, you just get access to that something else, that other plane of existence, the astral realm, astral travel people talk about? And is it just that you've got access to something at that point, that physically you're in your physical body but you can't move, but your unconscious mind is accessing something? As to what they see and why, I don't know. But again,
that's the thing that I find fascinating, that they see the old hag as they perceive it, some kind of witch. They're not seeing the slippers that have turned into crocodiles and sat on the chest, are they? Do you know what I mean? They're seeing a similar thing that has no relevance to their life.
Maybe again, it's that if you hear about different types of beings having different interests with us as a species, and if these are the more negative types of beings that are coming in during a really inappropriate time in your existence, that either they've got you in a vulnerable moment. And we've even heard people like Tom DeLonge talking about other entities feeding off of human emotion, negative emotions. So is it a case of that they have access to that in that moment, and that's why you hear of demons, hags? They're just classic representations that you would have in fairy tales and folklore of kind of not very nice beings.
Once again, something that's carried through time then, fairy tales and folklore,
And that's it. At one point it's a story, and now it is just a horrible bedtime tale, isn't it? Or one of those things you would have read as a kid to kind of scare your friends. But maybe there's that grain of truth going back centuries or millennia.
You've just bet me to it there, actually, because I was going to say, what it just a story? Is there some kind of grain of truth attached to it? But go on, Les.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy, and thanks, Paul. I got a question from Gaz Gray, Paul,
Gaz.
on the stream tonight, and he says, "Hi guys, only pops in, but a great show. I'll catch up later." And he says, "Have you ever brought or heard of anything non-physical from an experience, like clothes damaged, or unexplained dates on clothing or objects?"
It's a good question, isn't it? Or brought anything back from an experience. I mean, I don't know of any people that have done that. Once again, marks on my body. I mean, I don't sleep with any clothes on, so you wouldn't have got that. But I don't know about people who've come in contact with objects and lights, and like you said, well, the typical example, the guy that you spoke about earlier, who said somebody developed cancer after the light passed through them. Did it leave any marks on his clothing? Do you know whether that happened, Andy?
I'm not sure that was even reported. It may have been in the wider sense of it. But like I say, I do know it caused that kind of rare cancer going forward, but I'm not sure if it did leave any kind of discernible marks.
No. Okay. Short but sweet, that one, Gaz. But there we go. More questions, Les? Have you got plenty of questions, Les?
No, I think Alison Butler has remarked on your reports on the wraparound glasses guy, plastic skin. She just asked what was he wearing, but I think you answered that one when you talked
brown jumper, but he had no jumper on, as I say, when we came out of our house, and jeans. So there are not many black type. Go on, sorry, Les.
Can I just add something to the last thing was just you was talking about there, Andy and Paul. The wood, the Scottish wood incident with the UFO, with the two or three gangly bits on a cylindrical thing came out of the spaceship. What was it?
Dermot Wood.
Dermot Wood. That's it.
Robinson
The Malcolm Robinson
investigated
one's done everything on that incident, and so there was physical. He actually had the pair of trousers that he was wearing once, didn't he? Really, and there was all rips and everything.
But Malcolm had them on, didn't he? Money job.
Probably did.
He brought them for people to examine.
Yes, but physical evidence as a result of. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Good
there.
point, Les. Yeah. And well, let's just stay in Scotland for a moment. Falkirk, didn't they have a UFO flap, or haven't they had a few over a period of decades? Or do you not know anything about that?
Do you know, ashamedly, my UK history is much worse than my US. But yeah, Falkirk's a bit of a hotspot, as is Clydebank in the UK, which was quite close to where I stayed. There's been a few. I've interviewed Malcolm Robinson myself, and Decmont was one he talked about. Yeah.
How do you pronounce that, Andy?
Is it Decmont? Dech?
Decmont.
Yeah. So yeah, but do you know what I struggle with? And this is just a real personal thing, is hearing about sightings in Scotland. And just because I'm from there, that's it. It's one of those, even though I saw my first sighting in Scotland, I don't know if it's just one of those things that growing up, it was the US and America, and it was different country, different continent. It was far away. So these things happened there. So it's always more intriguing. And even when you talk about places that I know, like Bridlington, I know people from Bridlington and work with a girl from there. And when you hear about experiences and you think, it sounds, to use the word, kind of sexy and Hollywoodized, that there'll be an underwater base off the coast of California potentially, where the Nimitz and the Princeton are seeing these tic tacs. Yeah, but then when you say off the coast of Yorkshire, really? But then why not? Why would there not be? And it's just always a really interesting way to look at the topic, I think.
Yeah. So earlier I don't know how much you want to go into it, but some more historic cases then. Rendlesham Forest and that sort of wrangling, that all different views from the people that were involved in that probably harmed the case more than helped it. Well, it did probably. I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
What are your views on Rendlesham?
First off, you're 100%, and that's what I was going to say, that it's one of those cases that has suffered over time from more and more people coming forward who didn't, and it tarnishes the original story. And I think there's been people proven since then to have come forward to maybe embellished or weren't necessarily where they say they were, and it takes away from that original. Same with like Roswell. There comes a point where how many people can come forward. Pascagoula with Calvin Parker is a fascinating story, but there's still people coming forward now, and I think it just takes away each time you hear more and more. Why is it taking so long? And with Rendlesham, I think something happened in Rendlesham, and for me, and I remember it was Malcolm Robinson, I'm sure I was speaking, or was it David Clark? Was it David Clark I was speaking to about Rendlesham? And he believed it was something far more terrestrial. And I disagreed, but again, it was that, I could have him on, and it was for the Rendlesham anniversary. I had someone on to kind of speak about Rendlesham in the sense that it wasn't anything alien or otherworldly. I think it probably was, going back to that original story. But like you say, I think it's been damaged over the years with more and more witnesses coming forward.
Yeah,
and then you get the different...
there's tons of ways of looking how it could be damaged. I don't think there's any conspiracy. Some people would think that, people have come forward to muddy the waters deliberately. And I don't necessarily believe that could be true or is true. But, when you've listened to the Holt tape, as he's walking through that forest, and he's talking about seeing light dripping off this thing, this object that they're looking at. And then you've got, I think it was the astronomer, Ian Ridpath, he likened it to a lighthouse. It was the lighthouse, the Orford Ned lighthouse. And he said that as he's talking and saying, I can see this thing, he said it's during the cycle of the lighthouse. Yeah. And it kind of dispelled and sort of put a damper on all the military personnel's testimony for quite a while. And then it was discovered that there were a shield at the back of the lighthouse, so it wouldn't have gone into the forest. So that through his argument. It were difficult. I mean, we know we're going back a long time, 1980, and things evolve, don't they? Stories evolve, just like Chinese whispers. But I tend to sort of fall in with what, say, the principal players, Holt and the others, were saying myself.
Yeah.
After all, he was there. He followed this thing, allegedly, through the forest. So, and when you're talking about something with light dripping off it as it's moving through the trees and seemingly moving in a non-physical way because it's passing through the trees, then we've got, but then again, everything contradicts everything else. We're supposed to have got indentations where it's landed.
The tripod, the marks in the ground, yep.
You know what? As fast as I say one thing, you find something to contradict it. But it's an interesting case, and I think that definitely think something happened, and for it to remain so controversial over these years kind of tells you that something happened as well. So let's look at Calvin Parker then, and the Pascagoula. That were 1970s, weren't it?
Yeah, you're going back over 50 years now, yeah.
But you touched on something earlier. You said you think it damages when people come forward. It damages the cases in some instances. Do you think, is that always because these new witnesses might be coming forward? Because I think Calvin Parker had to be not pushed quite hard to come forward. Of Philip Mantle's principal player in getting Calvin's story out there. I don't know whether you've interviewed Philip, have you?
I have, and I've interviewed Calvin, yep.
And well, then, what did you come away with? We aren't being disrespectful to Calvin or Philip. What were your assumptions?
And I wish Calvin well. Calvin's in hospice care, I believe, just now, just with illness. He's decided to not go any further treatment, and his story has been wonderful through the decades in the UFO community. And even at the time, I think going back to the original interview with Calvin I had, and he shared the story many times before that, he hadn't spoken about it for quite a while. And it was only when his family didn't know about it even, and he was at a funeral for somewhere where he signed the book of condolence, where someone saw his name and came up and asked him, "Are you the same Calvin Parker from X amount of decades ago that had the UFO abduction?" And I think it was his wife didn't even know about it, and he had to basically come forward and say, "Well, yeah, that was me." And since then, but I think it's like what you say with Rendlesham, where you have the principal players, you have that original story, what happened at the time. And it just seems more and more, even now, new witnesses coming forward after 50 years and it's not a military event. It's not something that there was an exercise going on and they were all there at the time, and it's just that they've decided after so long to come forward. And that's not to say that's always legitimate either. But people were parked up on a ridge somewhere in Makeout Creek, Makeout Point, as you would have in the US, as you hear about in the movies, and they saw the light from a distance. And I don't know. I think we've got so much to talk about in modern times that the further you go back, and this is where Roswell, even everyone from Roswell's passed on.
Yeah.
So their grandchildren are now passing on,
So you think it's better to concentrate on, well, probably is on the new reports and the new sightings, because and not really concentrate on the historic ones?
I think they have their place, absolutely. Like Calvin Parker's story is wonderful, and for anyone who's not read about it, go and check out one of the books or listen to an interview. He's done those, and it's a fascinating tale. Same as Betty and Barney Hill, However, in terms of getting progress and moving forward the conversation and topic, you wouldn't present that on BBC at 9 o'clock, would you? If I said to you, go and present 10 cases or 10 reasons the modern day general public in the UK or the US or whatever should get interested in the UFO topic, to go back to Roswell, to go back to Pascagoula, to go back to Betty and Barney Hill, even going back to like the World Wars and the Foo Fighters, it's too long ago. What we need to start looking at more and more to get folks into the conversation is, that you've got pilots reporting this stuff, airline pilots coming forward now reporting it, filming these things with their phones. You've got some very credible people in the academic and scientific community. You've got Avi Loeb at Harvard getting private funding to go ahead with the Galileo project. You've got, I think one thing that goes right under the radar, pardon the pun, with the UFO topic, is Project Titan, which is currently getting pushed through the United Nations, hopefully via San Marino, to actually have a UFO or UAP office in the United Nations as well. These are all things the general public don't know about. The general public know that,
Tell us a little bit about Project Titan, or have you covered all you want to cover on it?
No, that's fine. Paolo Guzzardi is the Italian representative of ICER, which is the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research. God, I know what I sound like I'm talking about here, but this was just very recent. I had Paolo back on the podcast because as a group, Project Titan's been set up to bring forward the UFO conversation back to the United Nations and have it talked about on an international stage, which the US are very much leading the way with the UFO conversation, rightly or wrongly. They've been the lead player for decades now. But to have it then brought forward, it needs to be done via one of the countries that are a United Nations member. So you have to go for one of the smaller ones. So the San Marino, as a government and a country, very small country, is volunteering to put this forward, and hopefully it's being signed off through the San Marino government very, very soon to take forward a motion through the UN to establish a permanent UFO office. What that would then do and look like is very much up for grabs at the moment. It's still in those kind of early political stages and very much red tape and conversations. But that's a very interesting thing the general public doesn't know about or could get behind. And I was just going to mention before, Paul, like if you ask anyone in the general public, even with no interest in the UFO topic, what is Roswell or what was Roswell, they won't tell you it's a place out in the desert. You know, they'll tell you it was a UFO crashed some time ago. So people know that. And all these historical cases for me have a wonderful place in the lore and history. But going right now to the US government and demanding show us the bodies from Roswell, I think we've got far more easier and better things to go at, which are far more recent and current, that would help us get some progress in the topic and conversation.
So before we leave Project Titan, and I don't know this, and I don't suppose you do, but how much of an interest do these major powers in the world have in the extraterrestrial theory, or is it Project Titan more looking for otherworldly superpowers who've got technology that could potentially harm us?
What Project Titan are looking for is, from a scientific point of view, try and get enough eyes on this to show that there's something worth researching, something worth studying and getting together as a United Nations, would do. And can they pull resources? I think there are other countries more than likely very interested in this topic. However, like the UK, it would seem we have zero interest in the UFO topic or conversation at a governmental level. I imagine, from a military point of view, how could you avoid this topic in conversation, just seeing what's going on from a US point of view right now? Even if it was from a point of view of these not being extraterrestrial, and there are some incredible technologies out there being used by other countries to spy, why would you not want to get involved in this research? And I think there's a lot of governments in the background that probably just don't want to bring it forward first, but would be happy to get involved if it is on the table.
Yeah. Just before we leave Rendlesham, because I think we've got your views on it, and you think we're far better positioned dealing with the here and now, and I'm with you on that entirely. But just to add a little bit more validity to it, 6 miles away from here, there's a place called Beeford, little village. Mm-hmm. Somebody put me in contact with an ex-radar operator on the British base that were close to Rendlesham, and I went and spoke to the guy. It was when Colonel Holt came over. I was trying to get this guy to go and speak with Holt, just to have a little bit more interest for Colonel Holt, basically. And he wouldn't speak to him, but myself and Bob Brown went and spoke to the guy. Yes, he were a radar operator on the British base. They'd seen these spheres of light, these lights in the sky. They'd got these things on radar. And he said two American cars came onto the base, light blue and white, I think he said they were, but definitely light blue. The people that got out of the cars weren't military. They were in suits. But they'd got more clout than anybody on their military base, or so he says. Mm-hmm. They were debriefed. They were told not to say anything. This is all these years later, he's telling me. And they took the radar tapes and any relevant information. That tells me something really sensitive happened. Do you know? And would this guy speak to Holt all them years later? No. Would it? I know I'm sort of contradicting what you've said, and you're saying there's no validity in talking about these historic cases, but he could have had more meat on bone for me. This guy, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, that's it's not saying there's no validity talking about it. It's in terms of the progress, though, and that when these things happened so long ago, but you've mentioned something there which is interesting, is what can we take from that now that would help us break open the conversation and have that capital D disclosure, whatever people want to call it. For example, there are some physical evidence, though, aside from the testimony and the stories, does that radar data exist? So is
Well,
that something that could be got after? Whereas what we have, and even then, you're still talking about systems that, for all they were advanced at the time, are now 42 years old.
yeah.
So is this stuff even still there? The tape would have been degraded, all that kind of stuff. The reason I put a lot more into the modern day incidents and cases and studies is technology's improved on our side of things. Maybe not from the UFO point of view, because they've always had this incredibly advanced technology. But for us, we've got better camera phones. People are far more informed. People from all around the world Paul, 20 years ago, if you'd filmed a UFO, you could have put it on the internet, but not many folks would have seen it or even known how to download or find your video. Now you can get experts from all around the world within seconds telling you what it was, where it was, triangulating positions, taking it apart. People like Jason Gleaves using video analysis to tell you what it may or may not be. The modern stuff from a military point of view, they've got better radar, better data. We hear about them and we don't have it, but we hear about them having 4K tapes of these things sitting 50 feet off the wings of pilots, aircraft. Stuff that, if that does exist, that blows open the conversation from a point of view from the public and the general public's interest. And I just don't think we're necessarily going to have that from anything further back than 20, 30, 40 years ago at most.
Excellent, thank you. And you make a great point. I realise that Les might have a few more questions, but I just want to get one thing in. I'm mindful at time, Les. Have you got questions there?
It's just a question fair from me, Paul, at the moment to you. You mentioned earlier at Rendlesham the civilians came on base in this light blue car.
Yeah.
And they took
They
everything.
were military cars. They were American.
Oh, it was yeah. Well, the point being is, I don't know the answer to this. Did Colonel Holt? That's my light on. Did Colonel Holt have the original tape recording not took from him that he took on his dictaphone? Or was that taken?
I think it was taken. There'll be people. I mean, Andy might know that, and I'm absolutely sure that Sasha Christie sat in chat, and she's got far more knowledge of Rendlesham than me. But so I think it was taken. I'm not entirely sure. But jumping from that, let's just jump forward, and let's just go a little bit into the future. The new UFO report, or the reports that I think they're well overdue, aren't they, Andy?
Yep.
Have we any idea what's in them?
There's a lot of rumour online, but I think the only thing we know, a few people started reporting that half the cases that are going to be in there have been identified, which is what the recent New York Times article from Julian Barnes talked about.
How many? 200 or 300? Or...
The reported number from a few people were 366.
Right.
That went online in a few different Twitter accounts and people who seemed to be in the know, and that seemed to be verified. So half of those were reportedly identified as airborne clutter, trash, or foreign adversarial technology. And that's fine, that's great, because that's what should be done with these investigations. The idea being, if the stigma is being lifted from a military point of view, that these pilots, men and women, servicemen and women on various ships, vessels and whatnot are reporting what they are seeing, that it's then investigated and identified and we can move on from that. For me, though, that still leaves half of this number. And even if that half just there isn't enough reporting for some of it, let's even take a tenth of that. So say there's maybe 14, 15 of these that are truly anomalous experiences. It only takes one.
That's it. We only need one, yeah, you're spot on.
And that's what riled a lot of people up about the reporting in the New York Times recently from Julian Barnes, is it was very biased and seemed to have an agenda, because any type of reporting should be just presenting the facts, and to have a headline that reported, well, it's just all airborne clutter and nonsense. Now, half of it is, and that's fine, but what about the rest of it?
But potentially there could be 100 to 200 that haven't been identified, haven't been explained away as, I don't know, effects of weather and meteorological balloons, Chinese lanterns, drones.
I think the big thing for me, though, again, people need to temper their expectations, and this is something myself and Dan have said a lot on the podcast, even with the first report from the UAP task force that came out last year. people like Christopher Mellon, who's the former Undersecretary of Defense for the United States for the Bush administration, I think it was. Very powerful guy. The Mellons are a fascinating family. They are multi-billionaires going back, so they're not in this for the money, put it that way. Lou Elizondo, Sean Cahill, and others who are all heavily involved in the UFO conversation since 2017 through various means, sat on major mainstream platforms and talked about how the report that was going to come out shouldn't come out. And this was the one from last year, that it would take 2 to 3 years to put together a full and comprehensive report with a staff and funding to really investigate this properly. And what happened was something was done over the course of a few months and it was thrown out there.
Yeah.
The same thing is happening this time, to be honest, because the lead on this report is a Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who has no background in the UFO subject, which is a good thing. He's been brought in to compile this report with a small team. He's had about 6 or 7 months to put this together, and that's to go around the entirety of the US government and that network and go into all these departments and speak to all these people and all these teams to try and pull from them data and information and what they have, what they don't have, what they think, and compile a report.
Has he been chosen, this guy, specially? I suppose he must have been.
He was appointed, yeah.
Do you think
he's got a CV?
Obviously, get back to what you were talking about, if you can remember it, because if you're as bad as me, it'll just leave.
That's all right. Maybe.
Do you think if they'd have chosen somebody with an interest in the UFO phenomena, do you think it would have tainted the report or led it in a certain direction?
Yeah, it would have skewed it the other way, because I think you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
I'm just thinking this guy could.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know. Is he neutral, or do we know anything about him?
It's not a whole lot. He's got a fascinating CV in terms of his military background and things like that, but there's nothing on there that he's done UFO shows or talking heads or written books or paranormal studies, none of that. And that's the type of person I think you want, and someone who can really look at this objectively and from a neutral point of view. And if his report comes out and says there's nothing to this, which is almost definitely not going to be the case, but he's not had enough time to do that. It's like starting a university course, Paul, and being told, okay, you've got a 4-year course, but you've got 6 months to do it.
But you've got 6 months to condense it and come up with some kind of conclusions.
That's it.
Yeah, and we'll just go to Les. Any questions, Les?
Yeah, I've just got one from Alison Buttle. I know we had the question earlier about the 2 scariest encounters you know of, but she's asking, what is the most fascinating encounter or person's encounter you've had, Andy?
I'm probably going to forget the main ones now, thinking back. What I find fascinating, and again, I'm going to not be specific here just because I have a shocking memory, and if Alison reaches out to me privately, email or DM or whatever, I'll certainly correspond back and forward and share more detail. I've got a bit of a guilty pleasure as well for some of the remote viewing that goes on, and hearing remote viewers talk about managing to remote view inside of craft or remote view far off places, remote view beings and beings being aware of them being there. I've always found that stuff really fascinating, while there's maybe more of a lack of evidence for that. I think some of the more interesting stuff you hear about more recently is, again, it's been touched on when I spoke to Jeremy Corbell, that the US and no doubt Russia and China and other governments are doing the same thing. Some of these things they're filming in places that they shouldn't be. So, for example, if the US are spying on Russia in an area of Russian territory that they shouldn't be in, but they happen to film something that also shouldn't be there, i.e. a flying saucer or something like that, that's a good reason that video doesn't come out, because one, they're spying on something with incredibly advanced technology from a distance, but they're also happening to pick up those kinds of things. And that's the sort of stuff that's starting to bleed through. And people like Jeremy Corbell are confirming they're hearing these stories come through from military personnel too, that they have some pretty incredible footage, 4K footage, and that's what we would love to see, of unidentifiable craft that you would 100% put out to the public, and that would suddenly sway opinion overnight on what is flying about in our skies, if indeed these things are even flying as we know it. So that stuff fascinates me, and that's, again, going back to that, Paul, about I would love to see some of this stuff come out. Another video, a really good, clear video, not a FLIR camera, nothing like that, of something that people go, undeniably, wow. Oh, and sorry, just to add to that, James Fox, who we might touch on in Moment of Contact, he talks about the Chuck Clark footage. that's one that recently I talked to James Fox about as well. If you want me just to mention Chuck Clark's
Yeah,
footage.
please. No, yeah, let's. I'm mindful of time. We've 10 minutes left, so just
No,
let's
cool.
go with that.
Yeah, so apparently there is a VHS copy still out there from this gentleman, Chuck Clark, who was sent it by two young guys who were out in Nevada desert with like the old handheld camcorder, filming a bit of a road trip, going to some bars, you know, having some drinks. And essentially the footage shows them at one point hiding in their car, but literally inside of the car with the camera sitting on the middle. And there's a light swinging over the car, which you can make out through the windscreen. And the guys sound terrified. Apparently, hear them saying, you know, it's over us, it's over us. And the next thing, one of them says, I'm going out there. And the other one says, no. And apparently, he grabs the camcorder, goes outside, points it up. And there's this undeniable flying saucer hovering right above the car. You can see the detail on it. You can tell this is something that is not CGI. This is the mid-90s, early 90s. It's VHS footage. It's degraded. And the camera then cuts out. The battery goes. But apparently, it's astonishing footage of what is undeniably a flying saucer that these two guys captured. And speaking to James Fox, he confirmed on the podcast last week, 2 weeks ago, to me that Chuck Clark is still showing this footage as of a few months ago to people.
And as James Fox has seen the footage?
I can't. He said he has seen. Yeah, he saw the footage and he's seen stills of it online as well.
Yeah, so when you say this guy's still showing the footage, obviously, who's he showing it to? A bit, you know, because James Fox is quite influential, and we know that he makes these documentaries, but he's seen stills of it. So where are they?
So Chuck Clark still has the footage, and I won't say who he showed it to because James told me that in confidence. And to be honest, people would know the name, but it doesn't matter. Honestly, and I'm not just saying that, it doesn't. He showed it to two people. One of them a well-known public figure, the other someone that person took along with them. That was it. So yeah, someone that would have the money to go and pay to see something like that if they wanted to.
Yeah, well, unless Les has got some more questions, have you, Les?
I've got a quick one here, and it relates to videography, photography, or whatever you want to call it. Why in 2022 do we still come out with crap photography and video of any potential UFOs, do you think, Andy?
I can tell you 100% why that is still the case. So last year, there was a video went online which got viral exposure, went to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, where on a highway outside of New York, New Jersey, loads of people stopped their cars on a busy motorway at kind of sundown and filmed a UFO in the distance. Loads of people filmed this thing hovering in the skyline. Turns out, and bear in mind, this is with iPhone 13, Samsung S21s, all the latest camera equipment with no wobbly, shaky effects. It was the Goodyear blimp above a football game. Yeah. But from a distance, hundreds of people saw this. They all filmed it, and their fantastic modern technology still couldn't pick out from a distance it was a Goodyear blimp over a football game. So
great analogy, yeah.
There you go. There's people that had the opportunity to film that, and they still thought they were seeing something extraordinary. So you then try on the off cuff with 10 seconds notice to film something in the sky at a distance.
Well, that's the thing as well, you know. I mean, all the years that we've been trying to film these things up there, cameras are half decent, but you know, you're that taken back when something actually does happen. You're trying to digest what you're looking at for a few seconds. You know, it's not your first instinct just to flick a camera on, even though you've got them with you. It's weird. It's the night that these things presented for myself, Chris Turner, Jerry Denning, and I think Mark Farnell were there. Chris is good with a camera. Jerry's a professional cameraman. They didn't get nothing.
Yeah,
they didn't get nothing. I managed to get a few seconds of it, which we've shown at conferences, but. Sometimes it's that unexpected, or it's that sort of surreal what you're actually looking at, because you can't actually believe this thing's just appeared in front of you.
Yeah,
it's not always first thing that you think of. I'll just get my phone out and take a picture of that.
You walk outside and there's a beautiful full moon, and you think, wow, that would look stunning in a picture. And to the naked eye, it's incredible. It's large, it's big, the sky's black in the background, beautiful light source. You take a picture, and it's a little pinprick on your phone, and it's still a bit wobbly. Yeah,
crazy.
Can I just come in with a question here, guys? And thanks for the answer, by the way, Andy.
No way.
and probably warrants a longer conversation on this. But what are your thoughts? And this question comes from Sarah, just Sarah. What are your thoughts on the Pentrick incident?
Thanks, just Sarah. For me, and again, being no expert and not having researched it myself, but speaking to researchers, including Graham Rendell and Dave Partridge, it's a story of someone witnessing a military exercise, and just in my opinion, embellishing on the truth. There was nothing extraterrestrial, there were no UFOs, and enough people who at the beginning were backing up that story have since said that there's nothing to it. For me, there's nothing to it at all. And I'm sorry to Kaz Clark and anyone else who does peddle that particular story.
Your opinion's as valid as anybody's, and yeah, I mean, we've spoke to Kaz Clark on here. We've listened to the account of what she's seen. Equally so, we've spoke to other people who've not necessarily talked about that, but talked about it in the background and said similar to yourself. But once again, all of this will descend into arguments and counter arguments. So it's not a place that you want to go or myself.
Nah. It's good. Best of luck to her.
Yep.
Okay, this question's come late in the day from somebody called Fred Flintstone. And by the way, I think I know his brother called Barney. And so the question is, Andy, what does Andy think of the new Virginia documentary? I don't know what he's alluding to.
Oh, yeah.
You might know more.
Yeah, James Fox, Moment of Contact. I think it's a fascinating take on a very particular incident that happened. It's sort of Brazil's Roswell back in the mid-90s. I recommend anyone goes out there and picks it up. I've interviewed James, so is my colleague Vinnie Adams very recently on it as well. So you can check out those. There's a lot to it, and there are I say rumours. It seems to be verified as well. I've spoken to several Brazilian researchers. There is a video, again from the mid-90s, of an alien body from the crash that was retrieved, around 35 seconds long. Apparently, James Fox has offered $200,000 of his own money to get a hold of this video from the gentleman who has it. And apparently that will hopefully be happening sooner than later. And James has plans through a US news organization to publish that if and when he does indeed get a hold of it. But it's a fascinating case. I thought the documentary, up there with the Aerial School documentary, the Aerial Phenomenon, are two of the best documentaries ever produced on the UFO subject. And they're real fascinating looks at incredible incidents. There's maybe a lack of physical evidence or video footage, photographic evidence at the minute, but the testimony from all the people who saw it is incredible, and the emotion behind it. And like I say, I'm not an emotional guy, but you see it from these people. They saw something, they witnessed something incredible.
Why is that more important than any other historic case? Is it because it's not been heard before or in great detail? Because we're going back to 1990s and we're making something of this one.
Yeah.
Just
because for me, the people were either children who are now adults, my age, or they were adults who are now more senior. They're not people who are now in their 80s, 90s, witnesses coming forward. And there's still chance of getting data because you're now in the realms of having VHS.
Yeah.
And also the military tracking things at the time as well would have managed to capture data coming in. Apparently, NORAD contacted the Brazilian government to say something had entered their atmosphere. That's the first thing that happens in the documentary as well.
Excellent.
So
thank you.
There's evidence. Yep.
We're very close to running out of time here, but I do want to touch on just briefly, just for a minute or so. I better just stop myself. If there's any questions, Les, let's get them out, because we know that Les is going to get earache if he doesn't.
Well, it's I've just got something from a listener, a viewer, called A Disabled Welshman. Andy, I see you have a book called The Trinity at the side of you. What's it about? If you can probably do that in about 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah. It's co-authored by Jacques Vallée and Paola Harris about a case that happened before Roswell out in the desert. Apparently a recovered craft from the US government before they even know what to do with it, like maybe they did in Roswell. Really interesting case, largely based on the testimony of 3 young children who are now elderly. Again, for me, it's one of those that maybe lacks any evidence, not something we can dig too much into, but it's well worth a read.
Well, do you know, I was just going to talk about The Skies Above, but we've got 2 minutes. So just give people a rundown of your podcast, your YouTube channel, where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on all social media platforms. If you search That UFO Podcast on Twitter, it's the same. I'm most active on Twitter. It's at UFO UAP'Am. But again, just type in That UFO Podcast, you'll find me. On YouTube, That UFO Podcast. I'm an old school purist. I used to love radio, and the audio side of things for me is what I do. But the video does go out of the podcast on YouTube as well. So yeah, please check it out, find us. Daniel Zetterstrom, who's a fantastic researcher and analyst and investigator in his own right, comes on very often to provide analysis on the kind of latest and older news as well. So check Dan out as well. But yeah, it's great being on. So, and I genuinely would quite like to come on again in future.
Well, thank you very much. On that note, I'd just like to just briefly say, anybody wants to look at my books and what we're about, truthproof.uk, and obviously we're on the Truth Proof live stream now, so I'm just going to hand it over to Les after I've said Andy. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I've had nothing to do. Thank you.
Cheers, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. And I've got to thank everybody for coming on to tonight's live stream. As you probably noticed, one of my lights has just blown up. I think it needs 50p in the meter. That's what's happened there. But great stream, great guest on tonight. And Andy, I don't think you'll be getting too big-headed if I say you're the king of the podcasters when it comes to UFO podcasts. And it's been a privilege and an honour to have you on. So, thanking, let's have a look. I've got to thank Paul for doing the, Paul Gledhill for doing the moderating tonight. Sky wasn't able to be with us, but thanks, Paul, for doing the moderating. You sent the questions across just right so we could read them out. And for once, I think I did get every question read out. So, full marks to me, I guess. And it just remains for me to say we'll see you on the next podcast. And in the meantime, that job in a department store in December, I hope I get it. On that note, we'll see you next time.